over Christmas break, my family spent a few days in the Texas Hill Country. And the only thing I actually scheduled for us to do was to hike together to the top of Enchanted Rock, which looks just like that picture back there. Now, if there's any sticklers in the crowd, I'm really aware before I get started that this is only a hill, not a mountain. People in Colorado get very touchy if you begin to call things mountains that are not. So I'll just specify, this is a pink granite rock formation. It rises only about 2,000 feet vertically from level, but the climb is steep enough that you really do get a mountaintop experience when you arrive at the windy peak of this rock. There is no sign of human development up there. It's surrounded by a nature preserve. It's a park. And all around you is stone that saw dinosaurs. I checked, and it predates this pink granite. It predates iguanodons and pterosaurs. It goes back to the Precambrian time of our planet's history. There's almost no vegetation up there, just some tough, scrubby trees, always cactus, and if there are grasses, just ever-swaying grass in the wind. There are little dips in the rock where you can sit and shelter. There's the noise of the air moving swiftly and this beaming of sun and the feeling of your muscles and lungs that reminds you you've just earned this climb. You've earned this view. And then there's something up there that just feels sacred. It's palpable. That is, in fact, how the rock got its name, because local tribes believed there was something spiritual and powerful about the rock itself. Early settlers from the US and Europe also noticed how the rock would make sounds at night. After a warm day, as the rock cooled off, it would pop and creak and groan. And everyone agreed there was something magical up there, so they named it Enchanted. Last spring break, we had sort of an opposite kind of climb when we went to a place called Spider Mountain. There you see it. It's a chairlift up the top of this really thickly pine-forested incline. Everybody rides to the top, and then the fun of it is to hike or bike back down. And there are all these switchback paths through the trees all the way back to the bottom. It's flatter up there when you get to the top, and it's much more developed than Enchanted Rock. So the mountaintop feeling is a little less obvious at first, but you can get there. You just go right past the gazebo and the bathrooms and wander right to the edge of that flat top, and then the view will open up for you. Standing up there, I realized just how far we'd come on that slow, steady incline of the chairlift, and all perspective will shift when you see these little tiny valleys of human habitation and activity so far below. It's beautiful and it's daunting to find yourself so far removed from regular life, looking at it from the outside when you look at it from above, thinking you'll be there in the mix and the mess soon enough. But first, this mountain. There is a reason people go to the tops of mountains seeking religious experiences. There's a reason mountaintop is a metaphor. Just that word by itself means a powerful or euphoric moment, kind of a high emotionally that you feel. In today's reading from Luke chapter 9, 3 disciples and Jesus together have a mountaintop experience just before Jesus' focus shifts to Jerusalem. It's a very big moment in Christian lore, this mountaintop day. It brings us a theological word we should probably all know and understand. And also, it's a moment that matters a lot for what comes next. Jesus on a mountain stands out because it's a temporary situation. It is a brief and shining moment of revelation, of rest. It serves its purpose, and then the mountain sends Jesus on, back down the rock, across the forested steep, to the level place where Jesus chooses to be. Here's Luke 9, verses 28 through 36. About 8 days after Jesus said these things, he took Peter, James, and John and went up on a mountain to pray. Okay, short pause to tell you might need to know what these things are. 8 days after Jesus said these things, it's a conversation he had with his disciples in which Jesus asked them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answers correctly, "The Christ sent from God." And Jesus says, "Great, tell no one. Tell absolutely no one." Then comes Jesus' first prediction of his own death. That's in the same conversation. He reveals who he is, or Peter reveals who he is. He foreshadows his own death, even though the disciples probably didn't get it right in the moment. But he says, "The human one must be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the legal experts, and be killed and raised up on the third day." Okay, so less than a week later, or about, 8 days later, Jesus picks 3 especially close friends, 2 brothers, James and John, and Peter, and he walks up a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes flashed white like lightning. 2 men, Moses and Elijah, were talking with him. They were clothed with heavenly splendor and spoke about Jesus' departure, which he would achieve in Jerusalem. Peter and those with him were almost overcome by sleep, but they managed to stay awake and saw his glory, as well as the 2 men with him. As the 2 men were about to leave Jesus, Peter said to him, "Master, it's good that we're here. We should construct 3 shrines, or tents, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But Peter didn't exactly know what he was saying. Peter was still speaking when a cloud overshadowed them. As they entered the cloud, they were overcome with awe. And then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." Even as the voice spoke, Jesus was found alone. They were speechless, and at the time, told no one what they had seen. This passage is called the Transfiguration of Jesus. That big fancy word means an instant change into a more glorious state. Jesus was transfigured temporarily from an ordinary-looking human being into more of his complete self, his divine self. And I admit it's kind of hard for me to picture what that looked like. I'm not sure we're ever going to get it right. I do know that artists have struggled with this too, and that's why we get so many different versions of transfiguration, like the one behind us, which was Renaissance era, and then folk art versions. Many exist. I just picked this one, frankly, because those disciples look so terrified. I think something of real life was captured there. And then there are a whole lot of abstract versions of the Transfiguration. To me, the exact appearance of Jesus is less important than what the change means. So I'll just stick with something deliberately abstract that represents a lot of light. We know that at least was there. So the account gives us Jesus in conversation with 2 Old Testament figures. That's who Moses and Elijah are. One was the bringer of the law, and one was probably the people's most famous prophet. Together, they represent the cornerstones of all Jewish life, law and prophets. They also had mountaintop experiences of their own, these 2 guys, in their lifetimes. Moses went up a mountain to meet God and brought down the 10 Commandments. Elijah was camped out on the side of a mountain, basically feeling near to death, expecting a big deliverance from God, something dramatic, and then encountered God in a still, small voice on the side of a mountain. So those 2, I think, are in this scene to affirm Jesus' identity and place, to connect him to miraculous signs and the presence of the divine across all time. These guys affirm that Jesus is part of the same movement of God that they participated in their time. God is still up to the same thing. Peter, meanwhile, who is the stand-in for all human people, is just completely overcome with the sight in front of him, and he just wants to be helpful. His impulse is to build tents, and I don't think it's a bad one. I think it says that Peter knew something important is happening here. Something sacred is going on. And that's how his people marked another sacred event called Sukkot, or the Festival of Booths. They build temporary tents to stay in for a number of days. Second, I think Peter providing shelter is Peter offering hospitality. If you suddenly had some dignitaries among you, some really important people, you definitely want to be hospitable to your esteemed guests. And last, if there's a dwelling or a shelter, even just temporary, that could stretch out what you've already figured is a temporary experience. Maybe you just want it to last a little longer, and maybe that's where Peter was in his head. I think everyone there, whether consciously or not, grasped that it was temporary because Jesus never said anything about staying at the top of a mountain. He went there seeking something he needed, seeking something his friends needed, to provide a sign that they needed, to have a moment together. But what always mattered most was coming down from the mountain. Moses and Elijah disappear almost as soon as the disciples grasp who they are. And then, in a really big moment, one of only 2 moments in the New Testament where this happens, God directly speaks out loud. It comes at Jesus' baptism and here at Jesus' transfiguration, the 2 places in the New Testament where God speaks. And his words are much the same both times, so much so that those 2 events kind of remind us of each other. They become connected by what God does here. Jesus' baptism and the affirmation God gives Jesus starts off the first half of Jesus' ministry. His transfiguration and affirmation by God come right before and set the tone for the second half of his ministry. God is audible. God is heard speaking directly to human beings, saying, listen to him. At this critical juncture, at a place in ministry where Jesus has just started to predict something no one really wants to hear, and none of his disciples will want to happen, God affirms this one's on the right path and so very, very loved along his way. I think that's what the voice from the cloud was to Jesus, is a voice of love and comfort. Words of command to all else, but words of comfort to Jesus, who might have known what was coming, but still had to make the path by walking it. The journey is about to get rockier. For Jesus in the Bible, maybe for us here in our day and place, because love is never a smooth path. But here Jesus suddenly has all the credentials he needs to finish a mighty work, to model the most excellent way, and to bring all willing human beings along with him. His friends, incidentally, also have all the information they need to know. All they need to know, because God has just said, he's mine, he's doing my work, hear him and understand. Literally, that's what the Greek word listen to him means. I hear and I understand. I complete my hearing by understanding. And right after that brief, blinding, beautiful mountaintop moment, it's over. Jesus is alone again in front of them, and 3 human beings have absolutely no words for what they've just witnessed. So they told no one. They said nothing about it, which makes total sense to me, by the way, because on the outside, what really changed? What looked different after the mountaintop? The very next passage in this Gospel of Luke has Jesus coming down that mountain and into a waiting crowd where a man tells Jesus, I have begged your disciples, probably for days, to heal my son, but they couldn't. And then Jesus answers, you can infer whatever tone of grouch you infer. You faithless generation, how long will I be with you? How long must I put up with you? And then he goes ahead and heals the man's son. After the mountaintop, nothing changed in the challenges and difficulties of being around other people who are often working against each other's best. It was very good to be there at the top, blindingly bright and simple and clear, but the top was never a place to stay. It was only meant for a moment. It gave them sustenance and altered perspective. It heightened their awareness and transfigured ordinary life so that they could see more. It made plain the way to follow and the divinity of the one whom they followed. But then it was time to walk down this mountain. What is our work as Jesus people right now? I think we do our very best to take in the fully human, but also fully divine person of Jesus and just keep going. I think we got to keep going right now. Never choosing convenience, not aligning with power, but walking the difficult way of love. Today, I've asked Jonathan to provide our communion meditation through music. So this message ends and communion begins in the very same place, coming down the mountain from Transfiguration, hearing it from the perspective of someone who saw Jesus revealed. Just a few of the words I want you to listen for go like this. So walk down this mountain with your heart held high. Follow in the footsteps of your Maker. With this love that's gone before you and these people at your side, if you offer up your broken cup, you will taste the meaning of this life. See Jesus as fully as you can. See Jesus as beautifully as you and divine as you can, and then choose humanity all the same. Amen.